what the function is in C language. Since the function is the heart of C language, every task that we want to solve, every problem that we want to solve by programming should be written in the form of some functions. Means a bigger problem is broken down into the smaller one, and we then start coding in the form of the function, and those functions are basically called whenever required. That's why function is the heart of the C language, and in today's lecture we will study the concept of this function. We will learn how to call this function, what are the types of those functions, how can we call by values, and how can we call it by the references, and then we will cover the concept of recursion. So let us start now. What the function is, the first point is how can we define the function. A function, as we can, the function is a self-contained block of code, block of a statement that perform some specific task. The collection of a statement, the set of a statement collectively written in some coherent block to perform some specific task is called a function. Function, for writing of where the function is required, let us, we have a bigger problem, we want to develop a software for, let us say, library management system. Library management system is a abstract whole concept. To implement that, we have to break those in different modules, different parts, and those parts are called the subprogram, and those subprograms may be written in the form of some function. Means this subprogram is also known as function. We need function. Why we need it? We need, if there are certain codes written to perform some task, those code, whenever that same type of task are needed to be performed, we required to write those code again and again whenever it is required. Let us say we have calculated fine for the students, and that fine calculation instructions are written in, let us say, 50 line of code, and those 50 line of code will be always have to be written whenever the same task of calculation of the fine is required. So, and to reduce this redundancy of writing the code, we may write this code in some part of the function in the form of some function, and that function may be called whenever we required. Means we have enhanced the reusability of our code. So, to whenever we want to place a program multiple times, whenever we have to write the same code again and again, whenever the same task is required, we will call those function whenever it is required. So, to reduce the redundancy of your code, to make the reusability of your code, we write the function. We can declare and define both. The function can be declared and defined at a same place, but C also provide the mechanism to separately declare the function and define the function. Both can be done. What function contains, in C language there is at least one function required, and as we know that the C program start its execution from a function that is called main function. Always C program starts its execution from the main function. Means to execute a C program we required a main function. Main function is the first function to be executed whenever the C program starts. All other functions are called directly or indirectly within this main function. This is the example of a function. We have the main function, and we have defined a max function that has int return type, and it calculates the maximum between two numbers, and whenever we want to calculate the maximum between two numbers, we may call those function, we can call this max function to the place where it is the requirement of finding the greatest, the maximum of the two number that has been shown here in this program. We have defined the max function to find the maximum of 2, and that max function has been called in the main function to find whether A is maximum or B is maximum. The functions are based upon the development, on the basis of the development of the function. There are two type of function, library function and user defined function. Library functions are the function and on the basis of number of argument and the return value, functions are of four types that we will cover: function with argument, with return value, function without argument, with return value, function with argument without return value, and function without argument and without return value. These are on the basis of the number of argument and the return type. On the basis of arguments and the return type, the function are of four types, and on the basis of the development of the function are of two types: library function and user defined function. The library functions are those functions that has been already defined in the language, that has been already predefined in the library of the language, and those library functions and those functions that has been predefined are written in some header file. For example, printf and scanf are the predefined function that has been defined in the library header file stdio.h, means standard input output.h. clr/str get ch functions has been defined in the conio.h, and so on. These functions are predefined, that are defined in some header files, and that we also called the library. Whenever we required to call those functions, we have to include those library and directly call those functions to use. And the user defined functions are those functions that are defined, declared and called by the user according to its requirement. And to program a user defined functions, we have to perform following three tasks. We have to declare those functions, we have to define that, and we have to call that function whenever it is required. The declaration of the function, means function declaration, is also called the prototype declaration of that function, and it provides the basic information about functions to the compiler about the function, so that it can check the function call. Means it just provide the skeleton of the function, and it make aware the main function about that user defined function. Otherwise, whenever we will call that function into the main function, the main will be unaware about that function and it will show some error. So to make it aware about those user defined function, we declare those function above the main function. And the declaration of a function must contain return type, function name, and the data type of the parameter. Means the list of parameter, the data type of parameter that has to be passed, and we just mention the type of those function. We need not to name the parameter. We have just provide the list of parameter, the type of parameter we have to provide only, but we can pass the name also. We will see later on. Here is the syntax. To declare a function, we have to write the return type, then function name, and we have to provide the parameter list, then semicolon. We have to specify these three things only. Okay, for example, we have our function sum that has the integer return type, int return type, and that contains two integer type arguments. So whenever we define this function, we will have the same syntax, the same prototype, the same skeleton has to follow for calling for defining those function, and whenever we will call we will see that. Now we have to do three tasks. First one is the declaration of the function that we have just seen, and next we have to define the function. The function may be defined outside the main function. Whenever the definition of the function is kept above the main function, then we need not to declare those function, because we have defined those function above the main function, and the main is already aware about those definition. That's why we need not to declare that function. But if we specify the definition below the main function, outside the main function, below that we have to declare that also above the main function, to make the main function aware about this user defined function. The definition of the function contains the these four things. The function has to, in the function definition contains the return type, the function name, the parameter list, and the implementation, that is the body of the function. These four things has to be declared, has to be written to define a function. Means definition tells how the things will be implemented. The actual program, the actual instructions will be written here, where I have written body of the function. It contains the four part. First one is the return type, next one is the name of the function, then we will pass the formal parameters, and after that we will provide the body of the function. These four things has to be specified to define a function. For example, in the same sum function we are defining that sum function. Let it has an integer return type, means it will return some integer type value after the processing, and sum is the name of that function. Int a and int b are two integer type formal parameters. The formal parameters, this formal parameter will be assigned some value whenever the function will be called. Then this function find the sum of a and b and assign to the s, and thus summed value s is returned, that is of integer type. That's why the return type of this sum function will be int. Then we have declared the function, we have called the function. The rest thing that are left is to call those function. We have defined, we have declared. Now the things, whenever we require that same code, we have just to call those function wherever it is required. To call that function, we have to follow this syntax. We have to follow this syntax. We have to specify the name of the function, and then we has to pass the actual parameter on which the function has to perform. Then we will put a semicolon, and this way the function will be called. For example, the sum function may be called like this. We will pass sum, we will write sum and pass some x or y variable that contains the actual value that will be that has assigned some value previously, that will be passed. And this sum function, whenever called, the control will jump to that location where it has been defined. It perform the calculation over there, it perform the defined task over there and return the result, and that returned result will be assigned to some integer type, let us say c variable. And here is the overall. Here one thing you have to understood, that the parameter that has been passed during the calling of the function are called actual parameters, and the parameters that has been defined during the definition of the functions are called formal parameters. Whenever the function will be called by passing the value of the actual parameter, the value of actual parameter will be copied to the formal parameter, and on those copied value the defined function will operate. And when function call another function, whenever one function call another function, the control will jump to that location, processing will be performed over there, and the result will be sent back to the called function. So, to returning the result we use return statement. Return statement specify which type of value the function will return, and whatever type of value the function return, the return type of that function will be same. Okay. Now here I have sum of all these three concepts: function declaration, function calling, and function definition. Here first we have declared a function add that will contain some integer type value and it will return some integer type value. We have put the declaration of the function above main function, means main is now aware about the skeleton of that function add, means it is aware that there will be a add function that contains some two integer type parameters, and it will calculate some result and some integer type result will be returned back. It all things are now aware, it is aware about the main by the main function. Now we in main function we have defined two actual parameter a and b, and we have input it by the scan function. We have input the value of a and b, and that this same a and b has been passed to the add function during calling. This one is the calling of the function, this one is the calling of the function, this one is the calling, this one is the declaration. And now whenever the function is called, the control will jump to the definition of that function. This is the definition of that function. Control will, whenever the function is called, here the control will jump to this memory location, and the value of actual parameter a and b will be copied to the formal parameter x and y, and this formal parameter will be summed up, and the result is assigned to z, and this z is returned back to the called function, means it will return the z, return z will be returned to here it will be returned, and the return value is assigned to the s, and this s is printed up. This way the calling of the function is happened. Now this is the function call that I have already told you. First one is this one is the declaration of the function, this is the calling of the function, and whenever calling will happen, this type of jump of control will happen. Now I have written a function here. We have I am going to define a function that will find the largest of three number, and for that we are going to define a function named largest, and here is the definition of the largest function in this block. Here is the definition of the function. The largest function has been defined. It has been passed three parameters x, y, z of integer type, and it check which one is greater, and the greatest value is returned, and the x, y, z is of integer type, means this function is returning an integer type value. Whenever this function is called in the main function, we can see that first one is the declaration above the main function, and in main function this function largest has been called by passing the value of a, b and c, and whenever this function called, the control jump to the called function, it jumps to the definition of the function, and the value of actual parameter is copied to the formal parameter. The actual parameter a, b, c is copied to the formal parameter x, y, z, and it finds the greatest among those x, y, z, and the greatest value is, the largest value is returned, that is assigned to the max variable, and that has been printed. This way the jump of control is happened during function calling. Here is the function for calculating factorial of a number. This is the definition in the red box. and this function calculate, it has been passed a formal parameter n, it has a formal parameter n, and it calculate the factorial of this n, and the factorial f is returned in integer, that is the integer type value. F is returned in the integer type, and whenever we require to calculate the factorial of any number, we will just call this factorial function whenever it is required. Here it has been called in the main function by passing the value of n. The value of n is taken by the user from scanf function, and it has been passed to this factorial function. The control will jump to here, and the value of n is copied to this n. The value of this formal, this n is different and this n is different, because this both the storage class of both the n is different, means it is automatic storage class, and automatic storage class has its local scope, means this n is local to this factorial function and this n is local to this main function, means both are different n, they both will get the different memory location. So whenever this n is passed, this value of n is copied to the factorial n, this n, and factorial is calculated and returned, that is has been assigned to the fact variable, and that has been be printed now. This way we can call, declare, define and call a function. Okay. Now there are functions types on the basis of the argument value, and on the basis of argument value the functions are of 4 types that has been that I have been already told. The first one that is function with argument and with return type, means we will pass some argument to the function and the function will return some value also, means the function has the return type also, it is returning some value and some parameters are also passed. Both the things are here, and this type of user defined function has been defined, and this function just adding the parameter passed and the result is returned. Whenever this type of function definition is there, means during the calling we whomsoever will call this function will pass the parameter, and those parameter will be assigned to this formal parameter values, and this on those formal parameter the calculation will be performed, means that will be added and the result is returned. Means this function has to perform only the addition part, it need not to take the input, because the input will be passed by that function who will call it. Okay, means it need not to take the input. Main is going to call it, means main will pass the value of x and y in the form of actual parameter, and it is just summing of those x and y, and it need not to process the result also, it will return the result to the called function. The function that is calling it, the result will be returned back to those function, and that function responsibility means whenever this add function has been called, the value of a and b will be copied to the x, y and y, it will be calculate the addition and the result is returned, and this result is need not to printed over here, it will be sent back here, it should be stored somewhere and print those, means the responsibility of called function, responsibility of main is here to process the result, that is why we have assigned it in the s variable and the s has been printed. This way the function with argument value or with return type are used. Okay. Now second one is function with argument but no return type. It means function has argument but it will not return something. Here is the definition, here is the definition of the function, means function is not returning anything, means function is not going to return, means for that we have to write the void keyword. Void keyword tells that this add function will not return anything. it will add something, and result will also be processed over here. It will not return the result. Means whenever this add function will be called, the actual parameter value has been passed over here. The value of this actual parameter is copied to this formal parameter. It add those, and the result is also processed by this function itself, because it is not returning the result. If it returns the result will be processed by those function that is calling this function. So this way we can use the function with argument and without return value. And now the function without argument and with return type, means function we are passing, we are returning the value from the function, but we are not passing any argument to the function. And here is the definition of that function. We have return, means the function is returning some integer type value. The function is returning some integer type value, but we are not passing anything to this function. And in this case, where we are not passing any argument to the function, the responsibility of the defined function is to take the input that it is going to process. Means we have declared x, y, z variable. We will take the input x and y, and this x, y will be added by this function, and the result is returned. Means if parameter will be passed, then the part of taking the input will be skipped, because the input will be provided by those functions that will call it. But since we have not passed any parameter, the taking input is the responsibility of this module. Taking input is the responsibility of this function, and it takes the input and then process that, and result will be returned back to those functions that will call it. Okay, this way we can use a function without argument and with return type. And the last one is the function without arguments and without return type, means function is not returning anything and no argument is passed. Means it has to take the input, it has to process that, and it has to process the output also. Means it has to take input, processing over input will be performed by this function itself, and the result will be returned by those function. Means here all the things has to be done by this function itself, because it is not returning anything, it is not taking any inputs in the form of parameter. Means it has to be done all the things. It has to take input, it has to process those, it has to process the result also. So it has that you can see that this function add is taking the input, it is taking the input, and it is processing that, and it is processing the result also. All the three tasks has to be performed by this function itself, because we have not passed any argument and we have not returning the result to the called function. This way we can use the function without arguments and without return value. To pass the values to the function, there are two mechanisms, two ways. That first one is called by value and second one is called by reference. Whenever call by value means we are passing the value of actual parameter during calling of the function, and call by reference means we are passing the address of the actual parameter during the calling of the function. And whenever we call a function by passing the value of actual parameter, then the value of actual parameter will be just copied to the formal parameter, and those external subprogram, those external function will operate on those copied value. That's why whenever it alter those copied value, the effect of those alteration will not be there in the actual parameter, because it is doing on for processing those copied value. Means actual value will be not changed, actual value will not altered. But whenever we pass the reference, we pass the actual address of the actual parameter, then the external function will operate on the values by accessing those addresses and on reaching to there, and there on those address it will change the value. That's why the external function may alter the value of the actual values, actual parameter. Means in call by value the actual parameter may not be changed by the external function, but in call by reference the value of actual parameter may be altered by the external function. This has been shown over here. Here is a function swap, and before we have defined a function swap, that is swapping the value of x and y, and it is swapping the value, but we are calling this swap function by passing the parameter. We have called this swap function by passing the value a and b, means actual parameter value has been passed to this function. Means the value of a and b, the value of this actual parameter will be copied to the formal parameter x and y, and it will swap those formal parameter. So it will not change the actual value of a and b. It may not change the actual value of a and b. We can see that because this a and b has its own memory location, a and b, and this x and y has its own memory location, x and y, and whenever we call this function swap by passing the value of a and b, the value of a and b will be copied to these memories, and it will swap the value of this x and y, the value of this memory, and that will not affect the value stored in this a and b. That's why the outer function, this swap function, may not change the value of a and b. We can see the output, two numbers I have entered, 7 and 10, means 7 and 10 are the value of a and b. This is 7, this is 10, well, means here 7 is stored, here 10 has been stored, and 7 10 is copied to here, 10 7 and 10, 7 and 10 is copied here, and this copies value is swapped. So before calling this function swap, the value of a and b is 7 and 10, and inside swap function we have printed those, means it will print its own value, that swapped value, but after calling this swap function we can see that the value of actual parameter a and b will remain same. Before calling it is 710, and after calling also it is 710, means it may not change the actual value of the actual parameters. But whenever call this function by passing the address of the actual parameter, whenever we call this function by passing the address of the actual parameter, the things will be different. To pass whenever we are calling the function, we are passing the addresses of actual parameter a and b, and to hold this address in this x, y and y, we have to declare this x and y as a pointer type, so that it can accommodate the address of this a and b actual parameter. Means now whenever we pass this addresses of a and b, now the x has the address of a and y has the address of b, and whenever we process that value, we swap that value by using the value at address operator. This star is called the value at address operator, means x has the address of a and we are accessing the value at that address, means we are reaching the address of a and we are swapping the value of that memory location, means the actual value will change, because we are reaching on that memory location, accessing those value and then swapping there, means we are going to their memory location and changing the values there. So means after calling this function the actual value will change. That's, you can see that this by the output of this program, before calling the value of a and b are 7 and 10, but after swapping the value of A and B are, after swapping the value of A and B are 10 and 7, means the actual value are changing. This way we can use the call by value and call by reference concept. Here is another program of call by value and call by reference. Here I have defined a fun function, and it has been defined above the main function, and whenever a definition is above the main function, then we need not to declare those function. Declaration is not required because the main is aware about this function. So whenever it will be called, there will be no error because main already know about the definition of this function. But if this definition has been put after the main function and we have called in the main, then the main will, when the program start with the main function and this calling will happen, main will not aware about this function. So to make it aware, we have to declare over here before writing this main function. But since we have defined this function above the main, so we need not to declare those. This is the definition, and here you can see that the main function is calling there are two programs here. This one is the call by value and this one is the call by reference. Here we are calling the fun function by passing the value of x, means this x value has been passed, means when x value is passed, this value of x will be copied over here and it will change the copied value of x to 30. So it is changing the copied value, means it is changing its own x value. So the value of x of the main function will remain unchanged, means it will not be changed because the carbon copy of it has been passed and it is changing those value, means it is changing the value residing in its memory. So actual value of main function x will not be changed, but whenever we are passing the address of this x of the main function, and address will be gone over here and the value at address operator will access the value residing on those address and it changed here. So actual value will be changed. This way we can see that by calling the function by passing the value of the actual parameter, the value of actual parameter remain unchanged, but whenever we call the function by passing the references, by passing the addresses of the actual parameter, the value of actual parameter changed. Okay, we will, the rest of the concept will be covered in the coming lecture. That okay, thank you, thanks a lot.